In 1930, a young astronomer named Clyde Tombaugh discovered a faint point of light in the night sky, and it changed everything we knew about our solar system. What appeared to be just another star in the darkness of space turned out to be an icy and mysterious world at the most distant edges of our cosmic backyard, Pluto. This small dwarf planet is so far from us that sunlight takes more than 5 hours just to reach it. The New Horizons probe, the fastest spacecraft humanity has ever built, took almost 10 years travelling non-stop to finally see Pluto up close. And even then, it only flew by, unable to slow down or land. This made scientists ask something that sounds simple but is truly mind-blowing. Will a human being ever manage to set foot on this frozen world that sits billions of kilometres from home? Get ready to fall asleep while listening to this video and let your mind travel through space. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. Imagine for a moment a tiny spacecraft, not much bigger than a grand piano, racing through the void at over 36,000 miles per hour. It still took it almost a decade to reach a world that, from our perspective, is little more than a faint speck of light. That spacecraft was New Horizons, and its incredible journey to Pluto sets the only real concrete benchmark we have for understanding what a human trip might actually entail. You're not talking about science fiction concepts or theoretical physics here. You're talking about a mission that actually happened, with real engineering and real limitations, and it provides a sobering starting point for any conversation about sending people. The numbers from that mission are the foundation upon which all realistic plans must be built, and they immediately introduce a scale of challenge that is almost incomprehensible. New Horizons holds the record for the highest launch velocity from Earth, catapulted away by a powerful Atlas V rocket and a final kick from a third stage. Its trajectory was a masterpiece of celestial mechanics, a slingshot maneuver around Jupiter that added more speed without using a single drop of its own fuel. This gravity assist was crucial, bending its path and boosting its velocity, effectively using the giant planet's own momentum to fling it toward the outer solar system. Even with that incredible head start and travelling at speeds that could get you from New York to Los Angeles in about 4 minutes, the journey lasted 9 years and 5 months. That time span alone for a small robotic probe frames the first monumental hurdle. Now, consider the nature of its visit. New Horizons was a flyby. It screamed past Pluto at that tremendous speed, capturing a breathtaking but fleeting glimpse over the course of a single day. It did not slow down. It did not stop. It did not go into orbit. This is the single most important technical distinction between what we have done and what we would need to do. A flyby mission is a one-way street paved with pure momentum. You aim, you shoot, and you hope your timing is perfect. A crewed mission, by any sane definition, cannot be a flyby. No one would spend decades in space for a few hours of glancing out a window at a distant world. To make the journey worthwhile for humans, the spacecraft must do the one thing New Horizons never had to do: slow down. This requirement changes everything, and it multiplies the difficulty not by 2, but by orders of magnitude. The energy required to slow a massive life-supporting ship enough to enter orbit around Pluto is staggering. Think of it like driving a car cross-country, but your plan is to stop by throwing the transmission into reverse at the very end and using the engine to brake. The fuel needed for that braking manoeuvre would be enormous, and you would have to carry all of it with you from the very start of the trip. This is the tyranny of the rocket equation, a cruel principle of physics where adding more fuel to go faster or to slow down later also means you need even more fuel just to push that initial fuel mass. For a robotic flyby, we can accept a small lean spacecraft. For a human orbiter, we are instantly talking about something vastly larger and more complex just to overcome this basic physics problem. So, New Horizons gives us our first concrete data point. The travel time for a fast, minimal one-way trip is measured in decades, not years. Any human voyage that includes stopping will be longer, simply because carrying the fuel to slow down means you cannot go as fast at the beginning unless you carry even more fuel, creating a vicious cycle. The benchmark shows us the outer limit of our current propulsion capabilities when applied to this distance. We used our best rocket, a clever planetary alignment, and a lightweight payload to achieve that 9.5-year timeline. The human ship would be heavier, potentially much slower if using different propulsion, and burdened with the need to preserve life for the entire, mind-bending duration. Psychological and physiological dimensions are immediately cast into sharp relief by this timeline. A crew departing Earth would experience a journey longer than many professional careers. They would watch from their windows as Earth shrunk to a pale blue dot and then vanished from sight entirely, not for months as on a Mars mission, but for years. Communication delays would grow from minutes to hours, meaning a simple question and answer with mission control would take an entire day. The isolation would be absolute, unprecedented, and unrelenting. The spacecraft itself would become their entire universe, a tiny bubble of warmth and air hurling through a profound and eternal cold. Every system on board, from air scrubbers to water recyclers, would have to operate with near-perfect reliability for thousands of consecutive days. On New Horizons, the spacecraft spent most of its crews in hibernation, with most systems powered down. A human crew cannot hibernate, not with any technology we possess today. They would need to be awake, active, sane and healthy for the entire transit, which introduces requirements for food, water, exercise, medical care, and mental stimulation on a scale never before attempted. The mass of all these consumables and systems again feeds back into the propulsion problem, making the ship heavier and the journey potentially slower. Furthermore, New Horizons was a specialized tool built for a single purpose. A human ship is a lifeboat, a home, a hospital, and a research lab all in one. Its design philosophy is diametrically opposed to the minimalist approach that made the probe possible. The probe could be built with radiation-tolerant components and hope for the best over its decade-long cruise. A human crew must be actively shielded from two primary threats: cosmic rays, which are a constant drizzle of high-energy particles that damage DNA, and solar particle events, which are sporadic but violent storms from the sun that could deliver a lethal dose in hours. Shielding against this for years requires mass, often in the form of water, plastic or other hydrogen-rich materials lining the walls. This shielding is heavy, again impacting propulsion and speed. New Horizons sailed through these radiation fields, its instruments occasionally glitching, but it had no fragile biology to protect. The human body would accumulate damage with every passing day, raising cancer risks and potential cognitive issues, making the voyage not just an engineering challenge, but a profound biological gamble. When we look at the stunning images of Pluto's heart-shaped plain and its jagged ice mountains, we are seeing the triumph of the flyby model. It gave us our first real look at a new world at the cost of a single, focused mission. To translate that success into a human context, we must confront the fact that everything that made New Horizons efficient, its small size, its lack of a braking system, its robotic nature, its hibernation periods, is inadmissible for a crewed mission. The probe's journey is not a template we can scale up. It is a demonstration of the bare minimum energy required to get anything to Pluto in a human lifetime. It is the starting line, not the finish line. It proves the distance can be traversed, but it also illuminates the canyon of technology and resources that separates a speeding camera from a viable habitat for astronauts. Therefore, discussing a crewed mission based on this benchmark forces us to abandon incremental thinking. We are not looking for a better chemical rocket or a slightly larger crew capsule. We are looking for a fundamental revolution in how we move through space, perhaps with nuclear propulsion that can provide thrust for longer periods, or with visionary concepts like laser sails. We are looking for breakthroughs in closed-loop life support that can recycle every drop of water and every molecule of oxygen for half a century. We are looking for medical advances that can counteract the atrophy of microgravity and the insidious effects of space radiation. New Horizons took a direct, high-speed path made possible by a specific planetary alignment. A human mission might need to take a slower, more energy-efficient route, perhaps using gravity assists from multiple planets over a longer arc, which would extend the travel time even beyond the 9-year baseline. Every decision becomes a trade-off between time, mass, risk and cost, and the scale of each variable is astronomical. In essence, the New Horizons mission is our reality check. It is the data point that pulls the discussion out of fantasy and anchors it in the hard physics of distance and velocity. It tells us that with our current best effort, the travel time is measured in decades, and that is before we add the weight and complexity of human survival. It achieved its historic flyby with a launch energy that pushed the limits of what we can do from Earth's surface. To match that speed with a ship hundreds of times more massive is currently impossible. To then slow that ship down at Pluto is a challenge for another century of engineering. So while New Horizons beautifully showed us the way to Pluto, it also, perhaps more importantly, showed us exactly how far we have to go to make that journey with people on board. The path is no longer just a line drawn on a mission control map. It is a gauntlet of technological hurdles, each one formidable, that must be overcome simply to keep humans alive and sane, long enough to see that distant, icy world grow from a point of light into a planet outside their window. The clock started with New Horizons' launch, ticking off those 9 years and 5 months, and for human explorers that clock is still ticking, waiting for us to invent a way to make the journey not just possible but survivable and meaningful. So the clock is ticking on a journey measured in decades, but that clock is governed by a master variable more formidable than time itself: sheer distance. We are not talking about the distance to the moon, a 3-day trip, or even to Mars, a voyage of many months. We are talking about crossing a gulf so vast it defies everyday understanding. Pluto does not sit at a fixed point. Both it and Earth are moving on elliptical paths, meaning the separation between them is dynamic, shifting from a close approach of about 4.2 billion kilometres to a staggering 7.5 billion kilometres at their farthest. This is not a minor fluctuation. This is a difference of over 3 billion kilometres, a variability that means your travel time could swing by years or even a full decade, depending solely on when you launch. This immense and variable span is the primary dictator of everything about a potential mission, shaping not just the engineering but the very soul of the endeavour. To grasp its weight, consider communication. Radio waves travel at the speed of light, the universe's ultimate speed limit. Yet even at this velocity, a signal from Earth takes between 4 and 7 hours just to reach Pluto, depending on where they are in their orbits. A simple question from mission control would take an entire workday to arrive, and the crew's answer would take another equally long day to return. This is not a delay. It is a profound chasm that makes real-time conversation or intervention utterly impossible. In a crisis, the crew would be completely on their own. By the time engineers on Earth saw an alarm signal, the event that triggered it would have happened half a day ago. Kilometres, a variability that means your travel time could swing by years or even a full decade, depending solely on when you launch. This immense and variable span is the primary dictator of everything about a potential mission, shaping not just the engineering but the very soul of the endeavour. To grasp its weight, consider communication. Radio waves travel at the speed of light, the universe's ultimate speed limit. Yet even at this velocity, a signal from Earth takes between 4 and 7 hours just to reach Pluto, depending on where they are in their orbits. A simple question from mission control would take an entire workday to arrive, and the crew's answer would take another equally long day to return. This is not a delay. It is a profound chasm that makes real-time conversation or intervention utterly impossible. In a crisis, the crew would be completely on their own. By the time engineers on Earth saw an alarm signal, the event that triggered it would have happened half a day ago. This level of isolation is unprecedented and imposes a psychological burden we can barely simulate. The crew would know with absolute certainty that home is not just far away in space, but disconnected in time, transforming Earth from a place of immediate support into a memory, a collection of archived messages. This communication lag is just the tip of the iceberg. The distance radically transforms all logistics. For missions in Earth orbit or to Mars, the concept of resupply exists. If you forget a tool or run low on a specific medical supply, you can potentially send it on the next cargo ship. For a mission to Pluto, there is no next ship. Everything required for survival, for every possible contingency across multiple decades, must be launched with the vessel or manufactured on board with near-perfect efficiency. Every single gram becomes astronomically expensive because you must accelerate it to tremendous speeds and carry it for billions of kilometres. This amplifies the tyranny of the rocket equation to an almost paralysing degree. It is not just about the fuel for propulsion, it is about the spare parts for every pump, filter and computer chip. The spacecraft must be a completely self-sustaining world because the nearest replacement part is over 4 light hours away and moving farther. A vibrant, beautiful marble that provides constant visual and emotional connection. On a trip to Mars, Earth will shrink to a bright star, but it will remain a distinct point of light, a celestial landmark. On a voyage to Pluto, Earth would fade into the starfield, becoming indistinguishable from other stars without a telescope. The iconic pale blue dot image taken by Voyager is the perspective for most of the journey. The Sun itself would diminish to a very bright star, no longer a disk that provides obvious warmth and light. The external environment is the pure, deep cold of interstellar space, only a few degrees above absolute zero. This physical setting, combined with a communication delay, creates a level of isolation and environmental starkness no human has ever endured. Studies in Antarctic research stations or on submarines show the strains of confinement and isolation, but those crews have the knowledge that rescue is potentially weeks or months away. A Pluto crew would know rescue is impossible. They're on a committed one-way trajectory. The Earth out of view effect, a sense of disconnection, some astronauts report, would be a permanent, unrelenting condition. Combating the monotony, the loneliness, and the profound sense of being unmoored from humanity would be a mission-critical task, as vital as maintaining the nuclear reactor or the oxygen supply. The distance, therefore, is not just a number, it is a psychological terrain that must be mapped and navigated with immense care, requiring entirely new approaches to crew selection, training, and in-flight support. Furthermore, this vast gulf exposes the crew to a constant invisible danger, radiation. Within the protective magnetic bubble of Earth, and to a lesser extent within the inner solar system, we are shielded from the full intensity of galactic cosmic rays and solar storms. As you travel outward, you leave that protection behind. The space between planets, especially the void out to Pluto, is filled with a continuous drizzle of high-energy atomic nuclei from distant supernovae. These galactic cosmic rays pierce through hull and human tissue alike, damaging cells and DNA. On a short mission, the accumulated dose is a managed risk. On a decades-long journey, the cumulative exposure becomes a severe, potentially life-threatening problem. Additionally, solar particle events, violent eruptions from the Sun, can deliver a lethal dose of radiation in a matter of hours. The warning for such an event travels at light speed, but from Pluto's distance, the warning and the storm's leading edge would arrive almost simultaneously, giving the crew minimal time to retreat to a shelter. Therefore, the spacecraft must either have a permanently shielded safe haven, or its entire habitable volume must be heavily protected, necessitating massive amounts of shielding material like water, polyethylene, or even artificial magnetic fields. All that shielding is incredibly heavy, which again circles back to the propulsion problem. The distance forces you to live in this hostile radiation environment for so long that shielding is not an optional safety feature. It is a fundamental requirement for survival, adding immense complexity and mass to the vehicle. Finally, the distance redefines the mission's relationship with time itself. A journey spanning 30, 40 or 50 years is longer than the entire professional career of any astronaut and exceeds the political and budgetary cycles of any nation. The engineers who design the spacecraft may not live to see it launch. The scientists who plan the experiments will certainly not live to see the data returned if they're on a crewed mission. The mission becomes a generational project, a legacy for the species rather than a goal for a single administration or agency. This timescale introduces profound problems of continuity. Technology will evolve on Earth. The cutting-edge computers and software launched with the ship will become antiquated relics decades later. Will they still be maintainable? Can they be updated from light hours away? The political and social landscape of Earth will change in unpredictable ways. Will the funding and public interest necessary to support such a long-term endeavour persist through wars, economic shifts, and changing priorities? The crew, isolated in their craft, might find their cultural references, their knowledge of current events, and their very connection to a changing Earth fading into obsolescence. They would become time travellers in a very real sense, departing one era and arriving at their destination in another. The distance severs the mission from the easy flow of information, support and cultural context that underpins all previous human exploration. In essence, the challenge of distance is holistic. It is not a single problem to be solved with a bigger rocket. It is a pervasive condition that attacks every facet of the mission. The physics of propulsion, the engineering of reliability, the biology of human health, the psychology of the mind, and the sociology of long-term collective purpose. It demands a vessel that is not merely a spacecraft, but a resilient, self-contained micro-civilization, capable of enduring a century-long exile in the void. Every other challenge is a subset of this central, overwhelming fact. The void between worlds is not empty. It is filled with constraints and perils that multiply with every additional kilometre. To venture across it with human lives is to accept a set of conditions that transform the nature of the journey itself. The destination becomes almost secondary. The supreme challenge is enduring the trip. This is the true barrier, a silent, ever-present force that makes a crude mission to Pluto not just an engineering problem, but a fundamental test of human ingenuity and endurance on a scale we have never before attempted. The distance is the final boss, and it has multiple forms, so the distance defines the challenge, and time is the relentless enemy. To beat them, you need to move, and move fast. That simple statement leads us to the heart of the matter. How do you push a city block's worth of life-supporting mass across billions of kilometres in a time frame that doesn't consume multiple human lifetimes? The answer, unequivocally, is not with the technology that got us to the moon, or even flung new horizons on its way. The chemical rockets we've relied on for decades are fundamentally inadequate for this task. They're incredibly powerful for short bursts, perfect for escaping Earth's gravity, but they are terribly inefficient for the long haul. Think of them like a dragster car, astonishing acceleration off the line, but it runs out of fuel in seconds and coasts. A trip to Pluto is not a drag race, it is an ultra-marathon across an ocean. Using chemical propulsion for the entire journey would require a mountain of fuel so absurdly large it becomes a practical impossibility. The rocket needed to launch it would be of a scale we cannot even build, because most of that fuel would just be used to push the other fuel you need later. This is the tyranny of the rocket equation in its cruelest form. To shorten a decades-long chemical trip, you need more fuel to go faster, but that extra fuel makes you heavier, requiring even more fuel to push that extra weight in a vicious cycle that rapidly approaches infinity. So, we must look beyond what's in our current garages. We need propulsion systems that offer a much higher miles per gallon in space, known formally as specific impulse. This search leads us directly to the concept of nuclear propulsion, the most plausible next step technology for deep space travel. There are two main flavours here, and they work in very different ways. The first is nuclear thermal propulsion, or NTP. The concept is relatively straightforward, and it was tested on the ground decades ago. You have a compact nuclear reactor. Instead of using it to generate electricity, you use its intense heat directly. You pump a propellant like liquid hydrogen through the hot reactor core. The hydrogen heats up to thousands of degrees and expands violently, shooting out of a rocket nozzle to create thrust. The efficiency is about twice that of the best chemical engines. This could potentially cut the travel time to Mars in half, and for a Pluto mission, it could shave years off the journey. The hardware is within the realm of our engineering understanding. However, it comes with significant political and public relations baggage. You are launching a live nuclear reactor on top of a rocket, a concept that raises understandable safety concerns. There is also the challenge of handling and storing super cold liquid hydrogen for years in space. While NTP offers a meaningful improvement, it might not be the quantum leap needed to make a Pluto trip palatable. The other nuclear option is more efficient but slower to accelerate. This is nuclear electric propulsion, or NEP. Here, the nuclear reactor is used as a power plant. It generates a large amount of electricity which is then used to ionize a propellant gas like xenon. The ionized particles are accelerated out of the thruster by powerful electric or magnetic fields. The thrust produced is very, very low, comparable to the weight of a single sheet of paper in your hand. But the key is that this tiny thrust can be maintained continuously for years, even decades, using only a small amount of propellant. Over time, this constant push adds up to tremendous speeds. It is the tortoise to the chemical rocket's hare, but in the vacuum of space, the steady tortoise wins the race in terms of fuel efficiency. An NEP starship could be extremely efficient, but it has one major drawback. It cannot generate enough thrust to fight Earth's gravity well. It would have to be assembled in space, or launched by chemical rockets to a safe orbit where it could then begin its slow, steady acceleration. Furthermore, that slow acceleration means it takes a long time to build up speed, so while the top speed might be high, The initial part of the journey could be lengthy, potentially offsetting some of the time savings. Both nuclear methods, however, share a common non-technical hurdle. They require us to become comfortable with operating powerful nuclear systems in space. This involves not just the engineering, but international treaties, safety protocols, and public acceptance. It is a solvable problem, but it is a political and social challenge as much as a technical one. Beyond nuclear, we enter the realm of more speculative but fascinating concepts that could truly revolutionize travel. One of these is laser or microwave sailing. The idea here is to leave the power source behind. A gigantic array of lasers or microwave transmitters stationed in orbit around Earth or the Sun would focus a powerful beam on a gigantic ultra-lightweight sail attached to the spacecraft. The pressure of photons hitting the sail, while minuscule, would continuously accelerate the craft to a significant fraction of light speed over time, with no fuel on board. Once accelerated, the craft could coast. To slow down at Pluto, you might need a similar laser array already there, or you could use a secondary sail to reflect light back for braking. The potential speeds are breathtaking, potentially reducing interstellar travel times to decades. But the scale of infrastructure is mind-boggling. Building a laser array the size of a continent, focusing it with perfect precision over light hours of distance, and constructing sails thinner than a human hair but kilometers wide are challenges for centuries, not decades. Another concept is fusion propulsion, harnessing the power of the stars themselves. If we could achieve controlled nuclear fusion in a compact reactor-sized device, a feat we have not yet accomplished on Earth for power generation, we could have a propulsion system with efficiencies far beyond anything chemical or fission-based. It remains a giant if. The common thread with all these advanced concepts is that they are not ready. They're on the drawing board, in early lab experiments, or in the realm of theoretical physics. For a mission we might contemplate in the next 50 to 100 years, the only realistic candidates are variations on nuclear fission, NTP or NEP. Choosing between them involves trade-offs. Do you want a shorter overall trip time with higher thrust, NTP, accepting the challenges of handling nuclear material and cryogenic fuel? Or do you prioritise ultimate fuel efficiency and steady power for the ship's systems, NEP, accepting a longer spiral out of the inner solar system and the need for in-space construction? The decision would shape the entire architecture of the mission. An NTP ship might look more like a traditional rocket, with a defined engine burn period and then a long coast. An NEP ship would be a different beast entirely, likely massive to house the large power reactor and radiators to dump waste heat, with a spine-like structure and large arrays of thrusters that hum quietly for years on end. There is also the potential for a hybrid approach. Use a high-thrust system, like chemical or NTP, for the initial departure from Earth orbit and for this critical braking manoeuvre at Pluto, but use a high-efficiency system like NEP for the long cruise in between. This tries to get the best of both worlds, but it adds complexity. Every engine type, every tank, every power converter is another system that can fail over the decades. The propulsion system is not just about getting there. It is about the entire life of the ship. An NEP systems reactor could provide abundant electrical power for the crew's habitat, for radiation shielding systems, for water recycling, and for scientific instruments. An NTP system, after its burn is complete, might be just a dormant piece of hardware. So the choice of propulsion dictates the rhythm of the mission, the design of the vessel, and the daily life of the crew. It is the first and most critical piece of the puzzle. Without a leap in how we push mass through space, the dream of human exploration beyond Mars remains just that, a dream. The engines we choose become the heartbeat of the ship, and for a journey to Pluto, that heartbeat must be strong, reliable, and efficient enough to pulse steadily for generations. It is a daunting engineering frontier, but it is the one we must cross to transform the silent, empty distance into a pathway we can realistically travel. The development of such a system would represent more than just a new rocket. It would be the enabling technology for the entire solar system, opening up the outer planets, the asteroids, and perhaps one day, the stars. But it starts with solving the basic problem. We need a better way to push. How do you train a crew member to perform complex surgery, perhaps on themselves? How do you handle a sudden appendix rupture, a heart attack, or the progression of a previously undetected cancer? The ship needs a fully equipped medical bay and a doctor with the skills of a general surgeon, cardiologist and oncologist all in one. And that doctor cannot get sick themselves. The social contract of the mission is perhaps the strangest aspect. The people who launch are not the people who will conduct the primary science at Pluto. They will be elderly, changed by the journey. The mission must be designed for that. But it starts with solving the basic problem. We need a better way to push. How do you train a crew member to perform complex surgery, perhaps on themselves? How do you handle a sudden appendix rupture, a heart attack, or the progression of a previously undetected cancer? The ship needs a fully equipped medical bay and a doctor with the skills of a general surgeon, cardiologist and oncologist all in one. And that doctor cannot get sick themselves. The social contract of the mission is perhaps the strangest aspect. The people who launch are not the people who will conduct the primary science at Pluto. They will be elderly, changed by the journey. The mission must be designed for that. The science operations, the landing plans, all must be executable by people in their 60s who have spent their entire adult lives in microgravity. This forces a complete rethink of how we design exploration activities. Furthermore, the society that launched them will not be the society that greets their data. It's in radiation. Food supplies, even if mostly recycled, would become monotonous to the point of causing malnutrition from lack of appetite. The ship's culture would have to evolve, create its own traditions, its own art, its own history, just to keep a sense of progress and meaning. The crew would celebrate birthdays, mourn deaths, and mark the passing of years with a calendar that has no connection to the seasons of Earth. They would watch as their destination, Pluto, grows from a star-like point to a disk over years, a painfully slow process offering little daily encouragement. In essence, the problem of time transforms the mission from a journey of discovery into a test of survival. The primary enemy is no longer the distance or the radiation, but the relentless tick of the clock within the closed system of the ship and the human body. Every other challenge, propulsion, radiation, logistics, is amplified by the factor of time. Solving the propulsion might cut the travel time from 50 years to 30, which helps, but it does not remove the core issue. This is why concepts like human hibernation or generation ships emerge from science fiction as potential solutions. They are attempts to sidestep the psychological and physiological ravages of decades of conscious travel. Without such a radical breakthrough, a crewed mission to Pluto asks humans to endure a form of exile that has no parallel in human history. An exile where the prison is the spacecraft and the sentence is a significant portion of a lifetime. The question shifts from can we build a ship that can get there to can we build a world that people can sanely live in for that long, and can we find people willing to live in it? It forces us to confront not just the limits of our engineering, but the very limits of the human condition when removed from the world that shaped it. Time, therefore, is the ultimate non-negotiable constraint. You can throw more energy at the distance problem with a better engine. You can throw more mass at the radiation problem with better shielding, but you cannot throw anything at the time problem except more human endurance. And that has a very firm, very human limit. The voyage itself becomes the mission, and surviving it in a state capable of doing science at the other end becomes the monumental achievement, perhaps overshadowing the exploration of Pluto itself. This temporal dimension is what truly separates a crewed mission to Pluto from anything we have ever attempted or even seriously planned. It is the long, dark tunnel that must be traversed, and we have no real idea how to keep the light alive for the journey, so time is the relentless enemy, grinding down both machine and mind over decades. But what if we could simply pause the clock, not for the ship, but for the people inside it? This is where the concept of human hibernation, or more accurately, induced torpor, moves from the realm of sci-fi movies into serious scientific discussion as a potential game changer. The idea is seductively simple. If you cannot make the trip shorter, make the travellers less aware of its passage and dramatically reduce their resource needs. Instead of a crew awake for 40 years requiring food, exercise, entertainment, and managing their mental health, you have a crew in a deep, medically induced sleep for most of the journey, waking only for periodic checkups. Their metabolic rate drops to a tiny fraction of normal, slowing their breathing, heart rate, and all bodily processes. This would solve a cascade of problems in one stroke. The life support systems become vastly simpler and smaller. You no longer need a sprawling habitat with gardens, gyms, and recreation areas. You need a well-shielded, densely packed pod system, more like a set of high-tech hospital beds. Food and water requirements plummet. Psychological stresses from confinement and monotony are virtually eliminated. The aging process itself might be slowed, meaning the crew that arrives is biologically closer to the age they were when they left. It sounds like the perfect solution, but the gap between the cinematic idea and medical reality is currently an abyss. Let's look at what we can actually do today. The field of therapeutic hypothermia is real and in use. Patients after cardiac arrest or traumatic brain injury are sometimes cooled to reduce metabolic demand, giving damaged tissues a better chance to recover. This is a temporary, closely monitored state lasting days, maybe a week or two. It is not hibernation. Some mammals, like bears and ground squirrels, naturally hibernate for months. Their bodies undergo incredible changes. Heart rates drop to a few beats per minute. They live off stored fat, and their body temperature plunges. We do not fully understand all the mechanisms that protect them from muscle wasting, bone loss, and organ damage over those months. Humans do not have this natural capability. Our bodies fight to maintain a stable core temperature and metabolism. To induce a prolonged, safe torpor state, we would need to artificially replicate and control processes we are only beginning to decode. The medical risks are formidable. First, there is the simple problem of muscle and bone atrophy. In microgravity, even in torpor, the body would still be subject to the lack of loading. Without some form of artificial gravity or constant electrical muscle stimulation, the crew could wake up after 30 years unable to move, with bones as brittle as glass. Then there are the circulatory risks. Slow blood flow increases the danger of blood clots forming, which could lead to a fatal pulmonary embolism or stroke. The immune system, suppressed during torpor, could leave the body vulnerable to latent infections. We do not know what prolonged torpor would do to the complex neural connections in the brain. Could it protect the brain from radiation damage, or make it more vulnerable? Would long-term memory form or be retained? The fear is that after years in such a state, the person who wakes up might not be the same person who went under, cognitively or psychologically. The technological support system for this would be a medical device of unimaginable reliability. Each pod would be a miniature intensive care unit that must operate flawlessly, monitoring thousands of vital signs, administering precise drug cocktails or nutrient solutions, and managing waste for decades. A single pump failure, a clogged line, or a software glitch could mean death for a crew member who cannot wake up to fix it. The system must be so redundant and self-repairing that it borders on being a biological entity itself. This is not just a refrigerator for people. It is an artificial womb designed to sustain a complex adult human in stasis. The process of entering and exiting torpor is itself a dangerous cliff edge. Safely lowering and later restoring core body temperature, metabolism, and brain activity without causing shock, organ damage, or neurological injury is a monumental challenge. You would need to do this not once, but potentially multiple times if the mission plan called for periodic wake-ups for system checks. Each cycle is a high-risk medical procedure. And what about the periods of wakefulness? Would they be months long or just days? Waking up to the reality of your isolation, seeing that only a year of your subjective time has passed, but decades have passed on Earth, could be psychologically devastating. The disorientation and potential for severe depression upon these awakenings are serious concerns. Furthermore, hibernation does not solve all the spacecraft's problems. The ship still has to fly itself, navigate, repair external damage, and shield the dormant crew from radiation. The engineering challenges of the vessel remain, though they are simplified by not having to support active lives. The propulsion system still has to work. The mission control on Earth, or more likely an incredibly advanced autonomous AI on the ship, would have to manage the entire journey. The crew becomes precious, frozen cargo, not active participants until the final act. This changes the nature of astronaut selection and training. You're no longer picking resilient explorers capable of handling daily crises. You're picking individuals with the ideal physiology and psychology to withstand long-term suspended animation, which might be a very different profile. From an ethical standpoint, the idea of consent becomes stretched. A person can consent to a risky procedure, but can they truly consent to being placed in a state where they cannot change their mind for 30 years? What if, after 10 years of subjective sleep, a medical issue develops that requires a decision they did not anticipate? The legal and ethical framework for this does not exist. Despite these towering hurdles, research is slowly inching forward. NASA and other space agencies have funded studies into torpor for spaceflight, often focusing on understanding the biology of hibernating animals. Private companies have also emerged, aiming to develop torpor technology first for terrestrial medical applications, like buying time for trauma patients, with the long-term vision of space travel. The path is clear. First, achieve safe, induced torpor for weeks or months in a hospital setting. Then, scale it to a year or two, perhaps for early Mars missions. Only after that could we contemplate the multi-decade applications for outer planets. It is a technology that must be perfected on Earth, in controlled environments, before we ever risk it in space. For a mission to Pluto, hibernation is not a magic wand, but it is the only conceivable approach that makes the human dimensions of the trip remotely manageable with anything resembling foreseeable biology. Without it, the psychological and physiological toll is almost certainly prohibitive. With it, the mission architecture transforms. You could contemplate a smaller, faster ship dedicated mostly to propulsion and life support pods, rather than a generation-style habitat. The crew arrives biologically fresh, mentally sharp and ready for the intense periods of exploration and science at Pluto. They skip the decades of ennui and decay. In this light, the development of safe human torpor is not just an interesting medical exploration and science at Pluto. They skip the decades of ennui and decay. In this light, the development of safe human torpor is not just an interesting medical challenge. It is potentially the key that unlocks the entire solar system for human exploration. It is the technological prerequisite that makes journeys beyond Mars conceivable. It would represent a fundamental shift in our relationship with space and time, allowing us to travel on cosmic timescales within a human lifetime. So, while it remains a distant and uncertain prospect, its importance cannot be overstated. The journey to Pluto may have to wait not for a faster engine, but for a deeper understanding of how to safely put human life on pause. The dream of crossing such distances hinges on our ability to master not just the physics of space, but the biology of time. Until we can either move much faster or learn to sleep through the long, cold night between stars, Pluto will remain a destination for our robots, a glittering prize in the dark that we can see but not for the individual. But if that technology remains out of reach, we are left with a stark, centuries-old concept, the generation ship. This is not a mission where the astronauts who launch are the ones who explore Pluto. This is a mission where the explorers are the children, or even the grandchildren, of the original crew. The spacecraft is no longer a vessel. It becomes a mobile home, a self-contained world embarking on a voyage so long that its social and biological continuity becomes the primary mission objective. This idea fundamentally changes every parameter of the endeavour. You're no longer sending a team of specialists on a mission. You're founding a miniature, closed civilization with a singular, inherited purpose. Reach Pluto. The social and ethical dimensions instantly become as complex as the engineering. First, you must select the founding crew, but you're not just selecting astronauts. You're selecting the genetic and cultural founders of a society that will exist in total isolation for perhaps a century. How do you choose who gets to be an Adam or Eve for this new, tiny branch of humanity? What mix of skills, personalities, and genetic backgrounds ensures a stable, healthy, and functional community across multiple generations? The initial crew must include not just pilots and engineers, but teachers, doctors, farmers, and craftspeople. They must agree to raise children who will have no choice but to continue a journey they did not choose. This is the first and most profound ethical hurdle, the consent of the unborn. Generations will be born, live their entire lives, and die within the metal walls of the ship, all for a goal set by their ancestors. They will never feel sunlight, never breathe unfiltered air, never walk on a planet with an open horizon. Their entire universe is the ship. Is that a fair existence? Can a parent ethically commit their child to such a life? This question has no easy answer and transforms the mission from exploration to a form of societal experiment with no option for withdrawal. The physical design of the ship reflects this new purpose. It must be an ecosystem, a biosphere. We're not talking about advanced life support recycling 95% of water and air. We are talking about 100% closure. The ship must be a perfect miniature Earth, with balanced cycles for air, water and nutrients, Plants would be essential not just for food, but as part of the atmospheric processing. You would need gardens, aquaculture tanks, perhaps insect farms for protein. This is a technology we have never mastered. The Biosphere 2 experiment in the 1990s showed how incredibly difficult it is to maintain a stable, closed ecological system even on Earth. Oxygen levels fluctuated dangerously, pests overwhelmed crops, and the psychological strain on the biospherians was intense. And that was for only 2 years. Scaling that concept to a century-long deep space mission where you cannot open a window or get a resupply of soil or species is a challenge of a different magnitude. A single blight wiping out a staple crop could mean famine. A subtle imbalance in the nitrogen cycle could slowly poison the air. The ship's ecosystem would need incredible biodiversity and redundancy to be resilient, which demands immense space, itself a precious commodity. The social structure of this micro-civilization is a puzzle. How do you maintain a sense of purpose and cohesion? The original crew will be motivated by the grand vision of exploring Pluto. Their children will be raised on stories of Earth and the shining goal ahead. But what about the third generation, for whom Earth is a mythical place in Grandma's stories and Pluto is still a lifetime away? How do you prevent a societal split between those who revere the mission and those who see it as a pointless prison? You would need a carefully managed culture, likely with a strong shared narrative, education systems, and perhaps even a form of governance that keeps the mission on track across generations. Skills must be passed down meticulously. The knowledge to repair the nuclear reactor, manage the hydroponic systems, and interpret the navigation software cannot be lost. This turns education into a critical survival function, not just a general benefit. The society would likely become highly specialised and interdependent, with little room for rebels or those who reject their assigned role. The concept of freedom and individual choice would be necessarily limited for the sake of the community's survival. This raises the spectre of a rigid, perhaps authoritarian social structure, developing simply to ensure the mission continues. Would that be acceptable to the people back on Earth funding and launching this ark? Psychologically, the view out the window problem is acute. For generations, the outside view is the unchanging blackness of space, with distant unmoving stars and a sun that slowly fades to just another bright point. There are no seasons, no weather patterns, aside from internal system failures, no natural cycles beyond the artificial day-night cycle of the lights. This could lead to a profound cultural drift. Art, music, religion, and social norms would evolve in complete isolation from Earth. After a century, the ship's culture might be utterly alien to the Earth that launched it. When they finally arrive at Pluto and send a signal back, they may be communicating with what is to them an ancient and foreign civilization. The biological challenges are just as severe. A closed population of perhaps a few hundred individuals is dangerously small from a genetic diversity standpoint. Over multiple generations, the risk of inbreeding and the concentration of harmful genetic traits increases. Careful genetic management would be required from the start, possibly involving a frozen bank of sperm and eggs from a diverse Earth population, and planned partnerships to maintain healthy genetic mixing. This further complicates the social and personal lives of the crew, turning reproduction into a managed resource for population health. Finally, the ship itself becomes a historical artifact. It must be built to last for a century or more with minimal degradation. Every material, every weld, every circuit board must be chosen for longevity far beyond any product we make today. The ship would be a museum of century-old technology by the time it arrives. The knowledge to repair its most ancient systems must be preserved in an unbroken chain. In essence, a generation ship mission to Pluto is not an exploration mission at all. It is an exercise in creating a sustainable, closed civilization that can endure a century-long isolation. The destination is almost incidental. The real achievement is the creation of a self-sustaining human habitat that can survive the transit. This transforms the question from can we get humans to Pluto to can we build a world that can survive without Earth for 100 years? If we can answer that, then Pluto, and indeed any destination in the solar system, becomes reachable. The generation ship is therefore the most conservative solution in terms of relying on known biology. People living, having children, and dying. The most radical in terms of social and systems engineering. It accepts the timescale rather than trying to defeat it technologically. It says, "We will go, and our children's children will finish the journey." This long-term thinking is something humanity struggles with on Earth, let alone for a project of this scale and cost. It would require a commitment spanning generations on Earth as well, with funding bodies and public support that persists for a century. The people who champion the launch will not live to see even the first child born on the ship, let alone its arrival. The project becomes a legacy, a monument to long-term thinking. Ultimately, the generation ship concept forces us to confront what we are really willing to do to become a spacefaring species. Are we willing to create new branches of humanity that may never come home? Are we willing to design societies from scratch for a single purpose? Are we willing to think in timescales longer than nations? It is a mirror held up to our civilization's ability to plan beyond the immediate future. For a target like Pluto, a generation ship might seem like overkill, a solution for interstellar travel applied within our own solar system. But if the propulsion is slow and hibernation is impossible, it may be the only alternative to simply not going. It represents the total acceptance of the cosmic timescale, a humility in the face of distance that says we will match it with our own patience and continuity, one generation at a time. The ship is no longer a spacecraft, it is a seed, and the human culture inside it is the delicate spark of life that must be kept alive across the long, cold night. Whether that is a beautiful vision or a tragic sentence depends entirely on the world we build inside that jar, and the wisdom we use to seal it before launching it into the dark. That fragile spark of life inside the generation ship or the hibernation pod faces an invisible, relentless enemy that doesn't care about your social structures or your advanced medical technology, radiation. Once you venture beyond the protective magnetic bubble of Earth, you're entering a shooting gallery of high-energy particles. This isn't a minor hazard, it is arguably the most fundamental and unsolved biological barrier to human deep space travel. The radiation environment between here and Pluto is a mixture of two main threats, each nasty in its own way. First, you have galactic cosmic rays, or GCRs. These are not rays in the traditional sense. They are the nuclei of atoms, like iron, carbon or oxygen, that have been accelerated to nearly the speed of light by distant supernovae and other cosmic events. Because they are heavy and moving incredibly fast, they pack a tremendous amount of energy. When one of these microscopic bullets slams into the hull of your spacecraft, it doesn't just stop, it shatters, creating a secondary shower of even more particles. When this cascade passes through human tissue, it doesn't just damage cells like a lower energy X-ray might, it shreds DNA strands directly, causing complex double-strand breaks that are difficult for the body to repair correctly. This damage accumulates over time, significantly increasing the lifetime risk of cancer, causing cataracts, and potentially leading to degenerative tissue damage or even cognitive issues. The second threat is solar particle events, or SPEs. These are bursts of high-energy protons, and some heavier ions, ejected from the sun during solar flares or coronal mass ejections. Think of GCRs as a constant drizzle of radioactive rain, and SPEs as sudden, violent thunderstorms. An SPE can deliver a potentially lethal dose of radiation in a matter of hours if an astronaut is not adequately shielded. The storm can come with some warning. We can monitor the sun, but the warning time is not long, especially as you get farther from Earth and the communication delay grows. The key difference is that SPEs are somewhat manageable with dedicated storm shelters on the ship, as their particles are generally lower in energy than GCRs. GCRs, however, are the true nightmare. They're so energetic that they are extremely difficult to stop completely. For a mission to Pluto, the duration is the killer. On a 6-month journey to Mars, the accumulated radiation dose is a serious but somewhat manageable risk, a calculated trade-off. On a decades-long journey to Pluto, the cumulative exposure from the constant GCR background alone would almost certainly exceed all currently allowed safety limits for astronauts, and likely by a huge margin. It's not just an increased cancer risk, it's a near certainty of serious health consequences for anyone making the trip. This forces a radical rethinking of spacecraft design. You cannot just wrap the ship in a little extra aluminum. Aluminum is actually a poor shield for GCRs. When high-energy particles hit it, they can produce dangerous secondary neutron radiation, making the problem worse inside the cabin. You need mass, and specifically mass with lots of hydrogen atoms. Hydrogen is the best shield because its small nucleus doesn't produce as many of those nasty secondary particles, so the ideal shielding involves materials like water, polyethylene plastic, or even liquid hydrogen fuel tanks. It's not just an increased cancer risk, it's a near certainty of serious health consequences for anyone making the trip. This forces a radical rethinking of spacecraft design. You cannot just wrap the ship in a little extra aluminum. Aluminum is actually a poor shield for GCRs. When high-energy particles hit it, they can produce dangerous secondary neutron radiation, making the problem worse inside the cabin. You need mass, and specifically mass with lots of hydrogen atoms. Hydrogen is the best shield because its small nucleus doesn't produce as many of those nasty secondary particles, so the ideal shielding involves materials like water, polyethylene plastic, or even liquid hydrogen fuel tanks are strategically placed around the living quarters. But here's the catch. To provide meaningful protection against the full spectrum of GCRs over decades, you need meters of this material, not inches, meters. Imagine building a water tank wall 3 or 4 meters thick all around your habitat. The mass of that shielding would be colossal. Tip fields strong enough to deflect multi-GeV cosmic rays are astronomical with current technology. The magnets would need to be superconducting, massive, and powered by a nuclear reactor, adding another layer of immense technical complexity and failure risk. You're essentially trying to build a portable mini-planetary magnetic field. So, the radiation problem is a trap. Passive shielding, water, plastic, is too heavy. Active shielding, magnets, is too power-hungry and unproven. This leads to a grim realization. With today's understanding and technology, a multi-decade crewed mission into deep space may be biologically impossible without accepting severe, likely fatal, health outcomes for the crew. This is not an engineering problem, it is a biological limit. Research is looking into pharmaceutical countermeasures, pills that would help the body repair DNA damage more effectively or protect cells from radiation. This is a promising avenue, but it is in its infancy. We're talking about drugs that would need to be taken safely for decades, with unknown long-term side effects. You cannot medicate your way entirely out of a constant high-energy particle bombardment. The radiation environment also affects the ship's electronics. Prolonged exposure can cause computer memory to flip bits, degrade solar panels, and damage sensitive instruments. The entire vessel's electronic brain must be hardened against radiation, which often means using older, slower, but more robust chip designs, further complicating the mission's technological base. For a Pluto mission, the trip isn't even the only concern. Once you arrive, Pluto has no magnetic field and only a very tenuous atmosphere. It provides essentially no natural shielding from radiation. A surface base would face the same GCR background as the ship did in transit, plus whatever radiation comes from the surface ices themselves. There is no safe haven. This fundamentally changes the risk calculus for any human mission. It means that even if you solve propulsion, psychology, life support and cost, you may still hit this wall. The radiation hazard is silent, invisible, and cumulative. A crew could feel perfectly fine for years while their cells accumulate irreparable damage, only to face catastrophic health failures years after arrival or upon return. This forces an ethical question. Is it right to send people on a mission where a slow, painful death from cancer years later is a near certain outcome, even if they succeed? The current astronaut radiation exposure limits set by space agencies are based on a 3% increased risk of fatal cancer. A trip to Pluto would blow past that limit in the first few years, likely reaching risks well over 20 or 30%. No responsible agency would greenlight such a mission under today's safety protocols. Therefore, a massive breakthrough in either shielding technology, medical countermeasures, or transit speed is an absolute prerequisite. The propulsion discussion becomes even more critical because speed is a shield. If you can cut the transit time from 40 years to 10 years through a revolutionary engine, you quarter the radiation dose. This might bring it back into a marginally acceptable range when combined with other measures. So, the quest for faster propulsion is driven as much by biological necessity as by a desire to reduce mission time. In the end, radiation is the showstopper that doesn't get enough attention in popular imagination. Black holes and engine failures are dramatic, but the quiet, constant rain of atomic nuclei is what will truly limit human expansion into the cosmos until we solve it. For Pluto, it means that any realistic spacecraft design must have radiation mitigation as its central driving design constraint, influencing the shape, mass, itinerary, and crew selection from the very first sketch. It is the ultimate paradox. To protect the delicate human body for a journey across the void, you must surround it with a mountain of mass or a bubble of energy, both of which make the journey harder to begin with. Solving this riddle is not optional. It is the key to stepping beyond our magnetic cradle and into the true deep space that awaits. So we hit a wall, not of physics, but of finance. The radiation problem demands a massive ship with heavy shielding or revolutionary engines to shorten the trip. The time problem demands either hibernation technology or a generation ship with flawless life support. Every single one of these solutions comes with a price tag that doesn't just strain national budgets, it redefines them. We are moving from the realm of engineering challenges into the domain of economics and political will on a scale humanity has rarely, if ever, mustered for a peaceful project. The cost of a human mission to Pluto wouldn't be measured in billions of dollars. Think bigger. Think trillions. To understand why, you have to follow the chain of requirements. First, you need a completely new propulsion system. Whether it's nuclear thermal or nuclear electric, we don't have a flight-ready engine. Developing one involves decades of research, testing, building new ground facilities for handling nuclear materials in a rocket context, and overcoming immense regulatory and safety hurdles. That's a multi-billion-dollar program all by itself, likely spanning 20 to 30 years before the first test flight. Then you need the spacecraft itself. This isn't an Apollo capsule. It's a vessel that must function as a sealed, self-sustaining world for decades. Every system must have multiple redundancies. The life support must be a near-perfect closed ecological system, a technology we have not mastered. The radiation shielding, if passive, requires tons upon tons of specialized materials launched into orbit. The habitat must include artificial gravity, which likely means a large rotating structure, adding immense complexity. The computers and electronics must be hardened against decades of radiation, requiring custom, expensive components. The medical bay must be a full hospital. The food production requires extensive hydroponics or other biomes. Now, you have to build this colossus. It's too big to launch in one piece, so you must launch it in modules, using dozens, perhaps hundreds, of the heaviest lift rockets ever built. Think of the cost of the International Space Station, multiplied by a factor of 100 or more. The ISS cost around $150 billion in today's money, and it's in low Earth orbit with regular resupply. A Pluto ship is orders of magnitude more complex and must be completely self-sufficient. The assembly would require a permanent space dock facility, maybe at a lunar Lagrange point, itself a multi-hundred billion dollar infrastructure project. Then there's the cost of the mission operations. You need a mission control team that will work in shifts for half a century. You need deep space communication networks upgraded to handle the distance. You need to train not just the initial crew, but potentially their successors in a generation ship scenario. You need a vast, uninterrupted funding stream that survives economic recessions, changes in government, and shifts in public interest over generations. No single nation on Earth today would or could shoulder this cost alone. The entire annual budget of NASA is around $25 billion. The Apollo program at its peak consumed about 4.5% of the US federal budget. A Pluto mission would likely require a sustained commitment of a significant... The Apollo program at its peak consumed about 4.5% of the US federal budget. A Pluto mission would likely require a sustained commitment of a significant percentage of the global GDP for decades. This isn't a national project, it's a civilizational one. It would require a level of international cooperation that makes the International Space Station look like a simple handshake agreement. You'd need a binding, long-term treaty between multiple major powers to fund and support this endeavour, with contributions locked in for 50 to 100 years. The political instability over such a time frame makes this almost fantastical. The governments that sign the initial treaty will be gone long before the ship is even built. The public that initially supports it will have aged, and new generations will have different priorities. Maintaining the political will is perhaps a greater challenge than the engineering. Furthermore, there's the brutal question of opportunity cost. What else could humanity do with those trillions of dollars? Infrastructure. The argument that space exploration drives technological innovation is valid, but it's a harder sell when the direct benefits of a Pluto mission are primarily scientific and inspirational, with any spin-offs being incidental and unpredictable. Defending the allocation of such vast resources for a handful of people to visit an icy dwarf planet becomes ethically complex when weighed against immediate pressing needs on our home planet. So, who would pay, and why? There is no economic return on investment, no minerals to mine at Pluto that would be worth the trip, no strategic military advantage, no commercial product. The justification would have to be purely for science, for the human spirit of exploration, and for the legacy of becoming a multi-world species. These are noble goals, but they don't fill budget spreadsheets. It might require a fundamental shift in our economic thinking, perhaps the rise of a space-based economy where resources from asteroids or the moon lower the cost of space infrastructure, or where private capital from ultra-wealthy individuals or consortiums decides to fund it as a legacy project. Even then, the sums are so vast that even the richest individuals would see their fortune swallowed. The funding might have to be structured as a global endowment, a human future fund, with contributions from every nation, perhaps tied to a very small percentage of global economic activity. But achieving that level of global coordination and trust is itself a monumental challenge. The cost also dictates the mission profile. A one-way suicide mission is cheaper than a round trip, but ethically unacceptable. A generation ship might be more financially sustainable over time as costs are spread over generations, but the upfront investment is still staggering. Any major technical setback or failure during the decades-long development could lead to cancellation, wasting the entire investment. This financial risk makes it very unlikely any entity will ever start down this path without near certainty of success, which is impossible for such a pioneering endeavour. In the end, the price tag of a Pluto mission is a mirror. It shows us the current limits of our ambition when constrained by earthly economics. It tells us that while we may have the technical ingenuity to conceive of such a journey, we lack the collective financial and political machinery to execute it. Until either the cost drops dramatically through revolutionary advances, like nanotechnology or AI-led construction, or our global priorities change fundamentally, a human mission to Pluto will remain a thought experiment. The money is the silent, unglamorous bottleneck that underpins all the others. We can dream of solving radiation with force fields, time with hibernation, and distance with fusion drives, but if we can't solve the checkbook, the dream never leaves the page. This financial reality is why robotic exploration is not just the first step, but the only step for the foreseeable future. Robots are cheap, expendable, and don't need to come back. They can take the decades-long journey and send us priceless data for a fraction of the cost of keeping a single human alive for the same period. The economic argument for robots is overwhelming. So, when we ask when will we go to Pluto, the most honest answer might be when it no longer costs a fortune. And that day is not on any calendar we can currently imagine. It awaits a future where access to space is trivial, resources are abundant, and humanity's energy and focus are unified on outward expansion. Until then, the balance sheet is the final and perhaps most decisive frontier. After spending a fortune and decades in transit, you finally arrive. Pluto fills the viewport, a stunning, complex world of ice mountains and nitrogen plains, but the celebration would be brief, because a whole new set of brutal engineering problems begins right here. Getting to Pluto is one thing. Doing anything useful once you're there is a completely different challenge that could undo the entire mission. First and most critical is the issue of slowing down. For decades, your ship has been coasting at a tremendous fraction of its original speed, maybe tens of kilometers per second. To become an observatory, to go into orbit and study Pluto properly, you must shed all that velocity. This is not a minor correction. It is a braking maneuver of staggering proportions, requiring a fuel burn comparable to the one that launched you from Earth orbit in the first place. Remember, you've been carrying this braking fuel with you for the entire journey, a colossal weight penalty that made your initial propulsion problem even harder. If your mission design skipped this step, planning only for a high-speed flyby, then the entire multi-decade trip yields only a fleeting glimpse, a profoundly wasteful outcome for a human crew. So, you must brake, assuming you have the fuel firing your engines against your direction of travel for weeks or months. You finally ease into a stable orbit. Now you can look around. Pluto's gravity is only about 6% of Earth's. This is a double-edged sword. On one hand, landing on and taking off from Pluto, requires far less energy than on a larger world like Mars. The escape velocity is low, so your lander doesn't need a huge rocket. On the other hand, that weak gravity makes simple operations strangely difficult. An astronaut in a bulky suit might weigh only about 20 pounds on Pluto. That sounds easy until you realise that their inertia, the mass that resists movement, is still the same as on Earth. A gentle push could send them drifting slowly but uncontrollably for dozens of metres. A misstep while trying to drill or collect a sample could send them tumbling. Every tool swing, every footstep must be meticulously calculated. The surface itself is an alien environment of extreme cold. Temperatures hover around minus 370 degrees Fahrenheit. No material we currently use for spacesuits or lander components is designed to operate flexibly and reliably at that temperature for extended periods. Metals become brittle, lubricants freeze, seals fail. Your equipment must be specially engineered, likely with active heating systems which drain power. The tenuous atmosphere, mostly nitrogen with traces of methane and carbon monoxide, is practically a vacuum by Earth standards. It provides no appreciable weather, no sound, and no protection from radiation. However, it does undergo strange cycles where it freezes and falls as snow as Pluto moves away from the sun. This could coat equipment and solar panels in exotic ice. Speaking of power, sunlight at Pluto is about 1,600 times weaker than at Earth. Solar panels are virtually useless. Your ship and any surface base must run on nuclear power, either radioisotope thermoelectric generators or a full fission reactor, adding another layer of complexity and risk. Now, what do you actually do on the surface? The scientific goals would have to be monumentally important to justify the trip. Humans could deploy complex seismometer networks to probe Pluto's interior structure, searching for evidence of a subsurface ocean. They could drill deep into the ice of Sputnik Planitia, the vast heart-shaped glacier, looking for layers that tell a billion-year climate history and complex organic molecules. They could set up long-term atmospheric monitors to study its bizarre condensation and sublimation cycles over Plutonian seasons, which last for decades. The ability to react in real time is the key argument for humans. A robotic rover might spend a week approaching an interesting coloured patch of ice. A human geologist could walk over, examine it, decide on the spot to take a sample, and move on to the next target in minutes. It could repair a malfunctioning drill with improvised tools. It could change the day's plan entirely based on an unexpected discovery. This flexibility is priceless. But is it necessary? Much of the initial reconnaissance could be done from orbit with powerful sensors. Detailed surface exploration could be conducted by advanced, semi-autonomous rovers controlled from orbit with only a few seconds of delay, not the hours-long delay from Earth. These rovers could work continuously, without the need for life support or radiation shelters. The human crew, safe in their orbiting ship, could operate them via telepresence, feeling nearly as if they were on the surface without the immense risk. This raises the pivotal question: why send the fragile, resource-heavy human body down to that treacherous surface at all? The symbolic value of a boot print on Pluto is undeniable, a historic moment for the species, but the practical and scientific gains over a well-executed robotic campaign from orbit might be marginal. The risk of a catastrophic landing accident, after investing centuries of effort and trillions of dollars to get people there, would be unthinkable. So the mission architecture likely involves a compromise. The crew remains in the relative safety of the orbiting mothership, which serves as a command centre, laboratory and home. They deploy a fleet of sophisticated drones, rovers, and maybe even flying probes to explore the surface and the complex system of moons, especially Charon. They might conduct a few highly choreographed human landings for specific, irreplaceable, symbolic or scientific tasks, perhaps to deploy a major experiment or to collect a curated set of samples from a critically important site. But these would be short, risky sorties, not a prolonged base camp. Furthermore, the crew's time at Pluto is limited. They cannot stay in orbit indefinitely. Their life support consumables are finite, and the planetary alignment for a return trip to Earth, if one is planned, will dictate a departure window. They might have only a few months, maybe a year, to conduct all their science. This forces a brutal prioritization of tasks. Every hour of exploration is the dividend on a century of investment. The pressure to perform would be immense. The psychological state of the crew upon arrival is another unknown. After decades of journeying toward this point, the anticlimax could be severe. Pluto is not a vibrant Earth-like world. It is a stark, frozen and lonely rock at the edge of sunlight. The reality might be crushingly bleak compared to the dream that sustained them. Keeping the crew focused and productive after achieving their lifelong goal would be a challenge in itself. In the end, the arrival and exploration phase highlights a core paradox of human deep space travel. The very capabilities that make humans valuable, our adaptability, our intuition, our real-time decision-making, are counterbalanced by our profound vulnerability. The infrastructure needed to keep us alive in such an environment is so massive and complex that it often hinders the science it set out to do. The lander, the spacesuits, the surface habitat, the safety protocols, all of this mass and energy could have been used for more instruments, more rovers, or a longer mission duration if the crew had stayed in orbit. Therefore, planning the what to do at Pluto forces a brutally honest reassessment of the why of sending humans in the first place. If the answer is primarily for inspiration and symbolism, then a landing is non-negotiable, no matter the risk or cost. If the answer is for maximum scientific return, the optimal plan might keep the humans in orbit as directors and engineers, not as boots on the ground. This decision would shape the mission design from the very beginning, influencing the training of the crew, the design of the ship, and the allocation of every kilogram of mass. The arrival is not an end. It is the beginning of the most high-stakes final exam imaginable, where the crew must extract the value of the voyage before the clock runs out and the long, dark journey home begins. The science is done, the samples are sealed, and the view of Pluto begins to shrink in the aft windows. Now comes the most perilous leg of the entire Odyssey, turning around and going home. A round-trip mission is not twice as hard as one-way journey. It is exponentially more difficult, introducing a new universe of risk that makes the outbound voyage look almost simple. The core problem is energy, and it's a problem that borders on the impossible with known technology. To understand why, think of the journey in 3 phases. First, you accelerated from Earth to get to Pluto. Second, you had to brake at Pluto to go into orbit. For the return, you must now repeat both phases in reverse. First, accelerate away from Pluto to escape its gravity and set a course for Earth. And second, brake upon approach to Earth to safely enter orbit or achieve atmospheric entry. Each of these major propulsion maneuvers requires a staggering amount of fuel. The rocket equation, that cruel tyrant, becomes absolutely vicious here. The fuel needed for the return acceleration and the return braking must be carried with you all the way from Earth to Pluto and then still be unused when you need it. This means your starting mass back at Earth is astronomically higher. In practical terms, launching a ship with enough chemical fuel for a round trip to Pluto is simply not feasible. The rocket would be of a size we cannot comprehend. This forces mission planners to consider desperate alternatives. The most discussed is in situ resource utilization, or ISRU. The idea is to mine Pluto or its moon, Charon, for water ice, split it into hydrogen and oxygen, and manufacture your return propellant on site. This sounds elegant, but the scale of the operation is mind-boggling. You would need to land a fully automated refinery, power plant and fuel storage facility, likely years before the crew even arrives. This facility would have to operate flawlessly in temperatures near absolute zero, with no human maintenance, to produce cryogenic rocket fuels of sufficient purity and quantity. A single leak, a clogged filter, or a power failure would strand the crew forever. The technology for such autonomous, large-scale mining and chemical processing in a distant, ultra-cold environment does not exist. It is a gamble of monumental proportions, making the entire return journey dependent on a factory that must work perfectly the first time, with no hope of a resupply mission if it fails. Assuming you somehow get the fuel and launch from Pluto, the journey home is another decades-long trek through the void. But this leg is psychologically utterly different from the outbound one. On the way to Pluto there was anticipation, a goal ahead, the excitement of the unknown. The return trip is a voyage back to a past life. The crew, now older, physically diminished and mentally worn, must endure the same monotony and isolation, but with the added weight of knowing exactly what it entails. They will have been away from Earth for perhaps 50 or 60 years. Their parents are certainly gone. Their children, if they had any just before leaving, would be older than they were when they departed. Their friends, their culture, their world, all will have changed beyond recognition. The anxiety of return, known in psychology as the homecoming syndrome, could be severe. They might fear they are returning as obsolete relics, their knowledge outdated, their social skills atrophied, their very purpose fulfilled and gone. The Earth they dream of may no longer exist in the form they remember. The communication delay shrinks as they approach, but for most of the trip they're still alone with these thoughts. Then comes the final, terrifying climax, re-entry. The ship will be returning at velocities comparable to those of interplanetary probes, dozens of kilometers per second. Hitting Earth's atmosphere at that speed generates heat far beyond the experience of astronauts returning from the Moon or from low Earth orbit. The kinetic energy that must be dissipated is enormous. The heat shield technology used on Apollo or the Space Shuttle would vaporize instantly. You need a revolutionary heat shield material, perhaps something ablative on a scale never seen, or a radically different technique like magnetic shielding or a series of aerodynamic skips to bleed off speed gradually. Any miscalculation in the angle of entry, too steep and you burn up, too shallow and you skip off the atmosphere back into space forever, means death after a lifetime of travel. The guidance systems must be perfect, and they must be systems that have been sitting idle, exposed to deep space radiation for a century, and still function flawlessly. It is the single most technically precise moment of the entire mission, with zero margin for error. Upon a successful entry and landing, the challenges are not over. The crew would be physically wrecked. Decades in microgravity, even with countermeasures, would have left their bones frail, their muscles atrophied, their cardiovascular systems deconditioned. They would be unable to walk or even stand in Earth's gravity. Their immune systems, having not encountered terrestrial pathogens for a lifetime, could be dangerously compromised. They would require months or years of intensive round-the-clock medical rehabilitation in a sterile facility. Furthermore, they are returning from a pristine alien environment. Planetary protection protocols would demand a strict and lengthy quarantine, not just for the crew but for the entire spacecraft and all its samples, to ensure no back contamination of Earth by potential plutonian microbes, however unlikely. The crew, after finally coming home, would be imprisoned in a medical lab, studied as much as the rocks they've brought back. Their reintegration into society would be a profound challenge. They would be historical celebrities, but also temporal aliens, struggling to navigate a world that has moved on without them. The financial systems, the technology, the social norms, the geopolitics, all would be foreign. Their personal finances, if they had any, would be meaningless. Their legal status might be ambiguous. They would have outlived their original mission control teams and benefactors. Who takes responsibility for their care for the rest of their lives? The mission's legacy for them could be a lifetime of isolation and observation. Given this horrific gauntlet of technical and human risk, many serious analysts conclude that the first human missions to such distances will not be round trips at all. They will be one-way missions of colonization. This changes the ethical and practical foundations completely. If the crew is not coming back, you do not need the return fuel, the Earth re-entry systems, or the long-term rehabilitation plan. The spacecraft becomes a habitat for permanent settlement. This might make the mission marginally more feasible from a propulsion standpoint, but it introduces its own profound moral questions. Can we ask people to go on a journey from which they will never return, never see Earth or their loved ones again? Is it exploration or exile? The answer might depend on the crew's mindset, pioneers seeking a new home rather than explorers planning a report. But for a destination like Pluto, which is utterly hostile to permanent unsupported human life, a one-way mission is simply a delayed death sentence. There is no possibility of living off the land in any sustainable way. So a one-way mission to Pluto is not a colony, it is a monument. This stark reality brings the discussion full circle. The return journey is so unthinkably difficult that it forces us to question the very premise of a human mission. If we cannot solve the propulsion for a round trip, and we deem one-way missions ethically unacceptable for a non-habitable world, then the only logical conclusion is that we do not send humans at all. The return trip is the filter that eliminates almost all mission architectures. It is the ultimate test of our technical ingenuity and our ethical boundaries. To even contemplate it, we need breakthroughs not just in propulsion, but in materials science, autonomous robotics for fuel production, closed-loop life support for a century, and medical science to sustain the human body. It is a concatenation of every other challenge, all coming to a head in the final, fiery plunge toward the blue planet that launched them a lifetime ago. Therefore, when we dream of humans going to Pluto, we must dream of them coming back, and that dream, for now, remains the most distant of all. So if the round trip is nearly impossible and a one-way trip is ethically fraught, we are forced to ask the most fundamental question of all: what could possibly justify this? With robots being cheaper, safer, and almost as capable, the only conceivable answer is science. Specifically science that only humans on the scene could perform. This is the linchpin of the entire argument. We must identify the research so profound, so impossible to do remotely, that it warrants a century of effort and a mountain of resources. Let's be clear, it's not about planting a flag or taking a photo. It's about the kind of deep, flexible, intuitive investigation that even our most advanced autonomous robots cannot replicate. Consider the Martian rovers. They are magnificent, but they are slow. A single command cycle takes minutes to hours. A human geologist on Pluto could cover in a day what a rover might take years to survey. They could look at a jagged ice cliff, understand its stratigraphy at a glance, decide to climb it, chip off a specific sample from a specific layer, and immediately analyse it in a portable lab. This real-time adaptability is priceless when studying a completely unknown world. The geology and chemistry of Pluto are complex and bizarre. We have nitrogen glaciers, water ice mountains as hard as steel, possible cryovolcanoes, and an intricate surface composition of various ices. A human could navigate this terrain, making on-the-spot decisions about where to drill, what to avoid, and what constitutes a weird sample that deserves extra attention. They could set up a complex network of seismometers to listen for Pluto's inner workings, potentially confirming a subsurface ocean. But a robot could do that too, if carefully pre-programmed. The stronger argument lies in the search for life, or more likely, the complex chemistry that precedes life. Pluto is rich in organic molecules, the building blocks of life. We've detected tholins, complex organics, on its surface. There's evidence suggesting a subsurface ocean of liquid water, albeit a cold, salty, ammonia-rich one, buried beneath an ice shell. This is perhaps the most compelling scientific target. To investigate this, you would need to find a way to access that ocean. That could mean drilling through kilometres of ice in a location chosen by careful surface study. This is not a task for a simple robot. This is an industrial-scale operation requiring human oversight, problem-solving, and the ability to react to unexpected conditions. A drill bit hitting a hidden cavity, a pressure change, a chemical surge. Humans could manage a complex multi-stage drilling operation, adapt the technique, and immediately analyse any liquid or core sample retrieved. They could look for patterns, textures, or chemical gradients that scream biological process, but that a robot's preset algorithms might miss. Furthermore, humans could conduct long-term, real-time observation of Pluto's dynamic atmosphere and surface atmosphere interactions. Pluto's atmosphere collapses and reforms over its long orbit. Having a team there for even a few Earth years could observe this process in detail, taking measurements at multiple locations simultaneously, something extremely difficult to coordinate with robots spread across a world with hours of communication delay. They could chase weather patterns, sample atmospheric constituents directly at different altitudes, and witness surface ices sublimating and redepositing. The holistic integrative science a trained human crew can perform, connecting atmospheric data to surface features to subsurface probes, is of a different quality than pieced-together data from separate robotic missions. But the counter-argument is powerful. Could we not achieve 99% of this with a fleet of advanced AI-driven robots and landers sent at a fraction of the cost? The community is split. Proponents of human missions argue that the flexibility, the intuition, the ability to see an anomaly and immediately investigate cannot be matched. They point to Apollo, where astronauts made crucial unplanned geological observations and sample selections that vastly improved the scientific return. Opponents argue that AI and robotics are advancing so fast that, by the time we could mount a human mission a century from now, robots will be infinitely more capable. A well-programmed rover with a good suite of instruments and some level of machine learning could already make many of those intuitive leaps by recognizing patterns. The science argument also hinges on the unknown unknown. Humans are good at noticing the thing they didn't go there to find. A robot is looking for what it was programmed to find. The human might see a strange coloration, a peculiar rock formation, or an unexpected pattern and think, that doesn't fit. Let's check that out. This serendipitous discovery is a hallmark of human exploration. But is that potential for surprise worth the trillion-dollar price tag? This is where the science justification gets shaky. It must be overwhelmingly unique. Perhaps the only truly irreplaceable human role would be in the search for definitive evidence of life. If ambiguous chemical signatures from orbit suggested the possibility, only a human-led on-site laboratory capable of sophisticated, adaptive experiments could confirm it. No remote mission could be trusted with such a monumental discovery. The protocols for analysis, contamination control, and verification would be too complex. Yet, even this is debatable. We could send a suite of exquisitely sensitive, albeit inflexible, life detection instruments robotically. So, we circle back. The science justification is the only one that holds any water, but it is also the most vulnerable to technological progress. It's a race between our ability to send humans and our ability to build robots so smart they make humans unnecessary for pure science. For a Pluto mission, the timescales likely mean robots win. By the time we develop the propulsion, life support and shielding to send people, we will undoubtedly have created robotic avatars that can do the job from orbit or on the surface with near-human dexterity. Therefore, the science argument for humans at Pluto may ultimately be a paradox. The very scientific questions we want to answer, the deep interrogation of a world's chemistry, geology, and potential for prebiotic processes, are the ones most susceptible to being answered by increasingly capable machines before we could ever get humans there. This leaves inspiration and legacy as the only unchallenged justifications. But inspiring the next generation, or proving our capabilities as a species, are soft reasons that struggle against hard numbers about cost, risk, and opportunity. In the end, the scientific case for sending humans to Pluto must be so extraordinary, so specific, and so time-sensitive that it cannot wait for robotics to mature. It's hard to imagine what that discovery would be, short of picking up a clear, unambiguous fossilized structure, an absurdly unlikely scenario. So, while science is the necessary pillar for justification, it is a pillar made of sand, constantly eroded by the advancing tide of robotics and artificial intelligence. This forces a brutal honesty. A human mission to Pluto might only happen if we decide to go for non-scientific reasons, and then use science to sweeten the deal. The cart would be before the horse. We would go because we, as a civilization, decided it was a goal that defined us, and the science would be the wonderful bonus we conduct along the way. This inverts the traditional model of exploration, where science is the driver. For Pluto, the driver might have to be something else entirely, a need for a grand, unifying project, a testament to long-term thinking, or a simple, stubborn declaration that we go because it is there. The science would follow, and it would be amazing, but it might not be the reason we left in the first place. And that is perhaps the most realistic conclusion. The scientific justification is necessary for funding and credibility, but it may not be sufficient. It must be paired with a broader, almost philosophical drive that transcends a cost-benefit analysis. This makes the prospect of such a mission even more remote, as it requires a alignment of technological capability, economic surplus, and collective human will that we've not seen since the Apollo era, but on a scale 1,000 times greater and for a goal 1,000 times more distant. So the question of why send humans ends with a shaky scientific justification, and that is precisely because there is a powerful, compelling, and increasingly obvious alternative. Don't send humans at all. Send better machines. This isn't a pessimistic view. It's a pragmatic assessment of where technology is heading and what offers the greatest return on investment in scientific discovery. The robotic counter-argument is the strongest technical and financial case against a human mission, and it forces us to reevaluate our motives for exploration itself. Let's break down why robots are not just the easier choice, but likely the smarter one for the foreseeable future. First, cost. We've talked about the trillion-dollar price tag for a human ship. For that same amount of money, you could launch not one, but dozens, perhaps even hundreds of advanced robotic probes. You could create a fleet. Imagine sending an orbiter to monitor Pluto's atmosphere long-term, multiple landers to different geological sites. the ice plains, the mountains, the potential cryovolcanoes, and even penetrators or small rovers to explore the surface. You could send follow-up missions every decade, each one more advanced than the last, building a cumulative scientific understanding. If one fails, you lose a machine, not a civilization-ending investment in priceless human lives. The risk profile is completely different. Robots are expendable in a way humans can never be. They don't need water, food, oxygen, or radiation shelters. They don't need psychological support. They don't need to come back. A robotic mission is a one-way ticket by design, and that's perfectly fine. This simplification removes the most massive and complex systems from the spacecraft: the human habitat, life support, crew safety measures, and return propulsion. What remains is a lean, focused science platform. The entire spacecraft can be optimized for one thing: getting instruments to the destination and operating them. This leads to a second major advantage: autonomy and communication latency. Yes, there's an hours-long delay in communications, but this is a solvable problem with advanced software. We are already teaching rovers on Mars to make certain navigational decisions on their own. By the time we could mount a mission to Pluto, artificial intelligence for scientific analysis and prioritization will be vastly more sophisticated. A robotic lander could survey its landing site, identify the most interesting rocks or ice formations based on pre-programmed scientific criteria, and decide on its own to go investigate, all without waiting for a command from Earth. It could manage its power, diagnose its own technical issues, and even perform basic repairs using robotic arms. The limitation isn't the latency, it's the intelligence we pack into the system before launch, and that intelligence is advancing at a breathtaking pace, while human biology remains fixed. Third, robots can go places humans cannot. They can be smaller, more rugged, and designed for extreme environments without the need for the life-sustaining bubble. You could send a snake-like robot into an ice crevice, a drone to fly in Pluto's thin atmosphere, or a mole-like device to burrow into the regolith. These specialized platforms can take risks no human ever could, diving into potentially hazardous areas to collect data. Furthermore, with a fleet approach, you can explore multiple targets simultaneously. While a human mission is stuck at Pluto and maybe Charon, a robotic program could include probes sent to other Kuiper Belt objects, turning a single mission into a survey of the outer solar system. The science return multiplies. Fourth, and this is crucial, robotic missions don't get sick, old, or depressed. They are not affected by cosmic radiation in the same way. A computer chip can be hardened, a human cell cannot. A robot can be put into a low-power state for years during cruise, woke up perfectly functional. It doesn't suffer from muscle atrophy or bone loss in microgravity. The decade-long transit is a non-issue for a properly prepared machine. This allows for more flexible mission trajectories that might be slower but more fuel efficient, because time is not a biological constraint. You can take the scenic route, using gravity assists that add years but save fuel because your payload doesn't mind waiting. Fifth, robotic exploration accelerates. Every mission builds on the last. The lessons from Perseverance on Mars directly inform the design of a Pluto rover. The software, the instruments, the landing techniques, they all improve iteratively. Human missions, due to their immense cost and risk, are leaps. They happen once a generation, if that. The pace of learning is slower. A sustained robotic program to the outer solar system would create a constant stream of data and technological progress, steadily increasing our capabilities and understanding without the gargantuan gaps between human endeavours. Now consider the political and programmatic reality. It is far easier to secure funding for a series of focused, billion-dollar robotic missions over 50 years than to secure a guaranteed trillion-dollar, century-long commitment for a human program. The robotic path is manageable, sustainable, and resilient to budget fluctuations. A single administration can approve a Pluto orbiter. It takes a civilization to approve a human mission. Given these points, the burden of proof shifts dramatically. The question is no longer why not send humans, but why should we send humans? What can a human do that a well-equipped AI-driven robot cannot, and is that difference worth the astronomical additional cost and risk? For tasks like drilling for subsurface samples, a robot can be designed to do that. For complex on-the-spot geological analysis, a suite of instruments with smart software can make decisions. For repairing equipment, A dedicated maintenance robot or redundant systems can handle it. The human advantages of intuition and adaptability are being chipped away by machine learning and better engineering. There will likely always be a gap, but that gap is narrowing fast, while the cost differential remains a yawning chasm. This doesn't mean human exploration has no place. It means its place might be elsewhere, or later. Humans are perhaps best deployed where they can be supported, in orbit around interesting worlds, directing swarms of robots on the surface below, or on more accessible destinations like Mars, where the environment, while harsh, is not utterly prohibitive, and the travel time is measured in months, not decades. Pluto sits firmly in the domain where distance and time make the human presence an extraordinary burden. Therefore, the most realistic vision for exploring Pluto and the Kuiper Belt is a robotic one. It's a vision of increasingly autonomous probes, building a networked understanding of these distant worlds. Sending humans becomes a symbolic capstone, something we might do centuries from now when the technology has transformed to make it almost easy, when we have infrastructure throughout the solar system, and when the journey is no longer a lifetime commitment, but a long but manageable expedition. Until then, our avatars will go in our place. There are eyes, hands and brains in the deep cold, and they're getting smarter, tougher and more capable every year. To insist on sending humans to Pluto in the next century might not be a sign of ambition, but of stubborn nostalgia, a failure to embrace the incredible potential of our own machines. The future of deep space exploration likely belongs to a partnership, but for the farthest reaches, the silent, unblinking robots will be the true pioneers, and we would be wise to invest in making them the best pioneers they can be. The path to Pluto is clear, and it is paved with silicon and code, not with flesh and blood. It is a path that gets us the science sooner, safer, and leaves open the possibility that one day, when we have truly learned the lessons our robots teach us, humans might follow to see it for themselves. That robotic path, paved with silicon and code, leads not just to Pluto, but straight through it and out the other side, into the vast, dark frontier it calls home, the Kuiper Belt. This is the critical context often missed. Pluto is not an isolated oddball at the edge of nothing. It is the gateway to a sprawling realm of ancient ice worlds, a destination that only makes sense as part of a larger campaign of exploration. Thinking of a mission to Pluto in isolation is like landing in Miami and declaring you've explored North America. The real story, the compelling scientific justification, lies in what lies beyond. The Kuiper Belt is a donut-shaped region extending from Neptune's orbit out to vast distances, populated by countless icy bodies, dwarf planets, and primordial remnants from the dawn of the solar system. Pluto is its most famous resident, its king, but the kingdom is enormous. A mission that gets you to Pluto, whether robotic or human, puts you at the doorstep of this untouched wilderness. The science here is transformative. These Kuiper Belt objects, or KBOs, are cosmic time capsules. They've been kept in a deep freeze for 4.5 billion years, largely unchanged since their formation. Studying them is like having a direct line to the conditions and materials that built the planets. They hold clues to how the solar system assembled itself, why planets ended up where they did, and the origin of the water and organic compounds that eventually found their way to Earth. The New Horizons flyby of the KBO Arakoth gave us a stunning glimpse. Two icy lobes fused gently together, a preserved relic of the very first steps of planet formation. That one image revolutionized our understanding. Imagine what we could learn from detailed visits to a dozen different KBOs, each with its own unique shape, composition and history. So, a mission architecture changes when you view Pluto as a springboard. For a robotic mission, this is already the plan. An orbiter at Pluto could study it in detail, then use Pluto's gravity to slingshot itself deeper into the belt to rendezvous with another chosen target. Its propulsion system would be designed for this multi-object tour. The fuel might be limited, but the scientific return would be multiplied. For a hypothetical human mission, this perspective is even more critical, as it helps justify the insane difficulty. If you're going to spend a century getting humans to the edge of the solar system, you don't just go to one place. You establish a base of operations. Pluto, with its complex geology and system of moons, could serve as a scientific outpost and a potential resupply depot. The concept of in-situ resource utilization becomes slightly more plausible if you think on these scales. Water ice from Pluto or Charon could be processed into hydrogen and oxygen for rocket fuel and life support, not just for a return trip to Earth, but for hopping to other KBOs. The ship that arrived becomes a mothership, and smaller, short-range landers or probes are deployed from it to explore other targets in the region. Suddenly, the mission transforms from a single, brutal endurance test into the founding of a temporary movable research station in the outer solar system. The humans become field scientists in the largest field imaginable, able to visit multiple pristine worlds within a few years of each other, rather than waiting decades for new missions from Earth. This changes the psychological dynamic too. The goal is no longer just reach Pluto, which once achieved could feel anticlimactic. The goal becomes explore the Kuiper Belt, with Pluto as the first and major base camp. This provides a sustaining purpose that could span many years at the destination, making the long transit more justifiable. However, the technological hurdles for such a vision are, predictably, even higher. It requires not just getting there, but having enough surplus propellant and infrastructure to conduct additional expeditions. It requires even more reliable life support and power systems. It demands that the initial landing and resource mining operations on Pluto succeed perfectly to enable the next steps. For a robotic mission, this is challenging but conceivable. For a human mission, it pushes the concept fully into the realm of multi-generational planning, or requires propulsion breakthroughs that render the distances trivial, like fusion or matter-antimatter engines, technologies that are purely theoretical. Yet, thinking in these terms is essential. It elevates the discussion from can we visit that strange dwarf planet to are we ready to begin the systematic exploration of the solar system's final major region? This broader context also helps settle the human versus robot debate. The initial mapping, the selection of candidate KBOs, the reconnaissance, all of this is perfect work for autonomous robotic probes. They can scout the territory, identify the most interesting targets, and maybe even deploy beacons or preliminary infrastructure. Humans could then follow, decades or centuries later, to conduct the intensive hands-on science at pre-vetted locations. This phased approach leverages the strengths of both: robotic endurance for reconnaissance, human ingenuity for complex analysis. The Kuiper Belt also represents a practical boundary. Beyond it lies the scattered disk and the Oort cloud, but the density of known reachable objects drops. The Kuiper Belt is a destination rich with targets. If we can master operations there, we truly become a solar system-faring species, comfortable operating in the realms of perpetual twilight and immense distance. The lessons learned in navigation, communication, resource use and crew psychology would be directly applicable to the ultimate goal, interstellar travel. A manned outpost in the Kuiper Belt would be a dry run for a generation ship. Therefore, the question of a human mission to Pluto cannot be separated from our ambitions for the Kuiper Belt. Going to Pluto alone is a trophy mission, a spectacular stunt. Going to Pluto as the first step in exploring its neighbourhood is a sustainable program of discovery. This context makes the scientific justification stronger. The diversity of KBOs means a diversity of questions. Do some have active interiors? Do any have rings or unusual moons? What is the full spectrum of organic chemistry present? Only by visiting several can we get a representative picture. Pluto is the anchor point, the central hub from which this exploration could radiate. In the very long term, one can imagine the Kuiper Belt as a resource base for a larger spacefaring civilization, its icy bodies providing water and other volatiles for missions going even farther. While this is a distant dream, it underscores the strategic importance of the region. It's not just a scientific backwater, it's the third zone of the solar system, after the rocky inner planets and the gas giant realms, and we have barely touched it. So, when we debate the time, cost and risk of getting to Pluto, we must constantly ask, to what end? If the answer is solely to study Pluto, the case is weak against robots. If the answer is to establish a permanent human presence in the Kuiper Belt and begin its detailed exploration, the case remains fantastically difficult but philosophically richer. It becomes a question of when we choose to make that leap as a species. For the next century, the springboard will be used by our robotic proxies. They will be the ones hopping from one icy world to the next, sending back data that will year by year transform the Kuiper Belt from a field of anonymous dots of light into a catalogue of unique, complex worlds. Their success will determine whether humans ever follow. If we find something so astonishing that it demands a human touch, evidence of processes we cannot comprehend, or resources that change the economics of the outer solar system, then the equation shifts. Until then, Pluto's role as a springboard is primarily a robotic one. It is the first stop on a grand tour, a place to refuel and adjust trajectories before vanishing into the even deeper dark, proving that the mission never really ends at Pluto, it just begins there. The grand vision of being Kuiper Belt pioneers hopping from one world to the next shatters against a simple, undeniable reality. The human mind was not built for a cage, no matter how vast the view outside the window might be. After solving propulsion, radiation and cost, you face the most unpredictable and potentially mission-ending system of all, the psychology of the crew. The isolation on a trip to Pluto isn't like anything experienced on the International Space Station or in Antarctic winter overs. It is a fundamental, unalterable condition of the voyage, a psychological terrain more alien and dangerous than the surface of Pluto itself. The first and most profound factor is the sheer, absolute distance and the communication lag that comes with it. On the ISS, astronauts can have near real-time video calls with family. They see Earth, whole and vibrant, every 90 minutes. On a Mars mission, the delay grows to up to 20 minutes each way. That's challenging, but a conversation is still possible, even if stilted. For a Pluto-bound crew, the delay stretches to hours. A simple good morning and its reply takes an entire workday. This isn't communication, it's sending and receiving historical documents. The crew is effectively cut off from the living, breathing flow of humanity. There is no support, no real-time advice, no comforting voice in an emergency. They're alone in a way no humans have ever been before. This leads to what astronaut Andy Thomas termed the Earth out of view phenomenon. When Earth shrinks to a pale blue dot and then vanishes from sight entirely, a profound psychological shift can occur. The mental connection to home, to mission control, to the entire human race can sever. The crew's world becomes the ship, its routines, and its interpersonal dynamics. Everything else becomes an abstract concept, a memory. This can induce a deep sense of existential loneliness and disconnection that no amount of pre-recorded video from home can fix. Studies from analogous environments here on Earth, scientists wintering in Antarctica, crews on long submarine patrols, give us worrying clues. In these settings, even with the knowledge that rescue or relief is possible, crews experience intense psychological strain. Symptoms include depression, anxiety, insomnia, and cognitive deficits dubbed long eye, or winter over syndrome. Irritability flares up. Small annoyances, how someone chews their food, repetitive habit, become major sources of conflict. In a sealed environment for decades, with no escape, these conflicts don't just fade away, they fester and amplify. On a submarine, the patrol ends after a few months. On a Pluto mission, there is no end until the destination, which is decades away. The monotony is itself a weapon. The environment is static. The same walls, the same faces, the same routines of exercise, maintenance, and sleep. The external view is the unchanging starfield. There are no seasons, no weather, no new sensory inputs. The brain craves novelty and it will receive none. This can lead to apathy, a loss of motivation, and severe boredom, which in turn can cause crew members to neglect crucial tasks or make careless errors. The social structure of the crew becomes the most critical life support system. You're not just selecting the best pilots or geologists. You're selecting a family, a self-contained society that must remain functional and cooperative under unimaginable stress. How do you structure authority? Is it a military-style chain of command, or a more democratic consensus? What happens if the commander loses the confidence of the crew? What if a romantic relationship forms and then sours, poisoning the atmosphere? What if someone develops a psychological disorder like paranoia or severe depression? There is no option to send them home. The crew must be their own psychologists, their own mediators, and their own jailers, all while performing their technical duties. The mission design must account for this. The spacecraft cannot be just a machine, it must be a habitat designed for mental health. This means private spaces where someone can truly be alone, not just a curtained-off bunk. It means communal areas that are inviting and can be reconfigured to break the monotony. It likely means immersive virtual reality systems that can simulate walks in a forest, the sound of rain, or a bustling city street. anything to provide a sensory break from the metal walls. Lighting systems that mimic a natural day-night cycle, and perhaps even simulate the changing light of seasons, would be crucial. The workload must be carefully balanced between necessary tasks, meaningful scientific research, and allocated leisure time. Too much idle time is dangerous, but so is burnout from relentless work. The crew would need to create their own culture, their own traditions and holidays to mark the passage of time and maintain a sense of progress and purpose. Even the concept of purpose itself is under threat. For the first half of the mission, the purpose is clear: get to Pluto. But what about year 25, when Pluto is still a distant speck and the daily routine is mind-numbingly the same? How do you maintain vigilance and care for systems when the payoff is decades away? This requires a type of long-term thinking and discipline that is exceptionally rare. Furthermore, in a one-way or generation ship scenario, the psychological dynamic is even more complex. For a generation ship, the original crew's purpose is to build a society for their children, who may not share their zeal for a destination they will never see. Maintaining social stability and a unified cultural purpose across generations is a problem of human civilization we have never solved on a small closed scale. For a one-way mission, the crew must come to terms with the fact they will never see Earth again, never feel the sun or wind, never hug a loved one. This acceptance is a profound psychological hurdle that must be cleared before launch, not during the voyage. The selection process, therefore, becomes a deep, years-long psychological investigation. You would need to find individuals who are not only brilliant and physically resilient, but also incredibly emotionally stable, conflict-averse, and possess a high tolerance for monotony and isolation. Team dynamics would be tested in long-duration simulated missions, perhaps lasting years, in an attempt to weed out incompatibilities. Yet even the best screening cannot predict how a person will change after 15 years in the void. Ultimately, the psychological challenge is the one for which we have the fewest technological fixes. You can build a bigger rocket for propulsion, a thicker shield for radiation, but you cannot engineer a perfect human mind for a century of isolation. This means the mission's success becomes a bet on our current, incomplete understanding of psychology. It would require the development of an entirely new field, deep space psychological support, and even then, it remains a colossal gamble. The crew's mental cohesion is the single point of failure that no amount of engineering redundancy can back up. If it breaks, the mission breaks, catastrophically and irreversibly. Therefore, any realistic plan must place psychology at the very centre, not as an afterthought, but as a primary design driver shaping the ship's architecture, daily routines, crew composition, and training. The journey to Pluto isn't just a test of spacecraft. It is the ultimate test of the human spirit's ability to endure a chosen exile, to find meaning in the meaningless void, and to remain not just alive, but human in an environment that offers none of the cues our psyche evolved to need. Before we ask if we can build a ship to go the distance, we must ask if we can build a society of a handful of souls that can survive the trip without tearing itself apart. The final frontier may not be space, but the space between our own ears under conditions of extreme and permanent isolation. So after dissecting the immense psychological gauntlet, the brutal physics, the astronomical costs, and the ethical quandaries, we arrive at the final summarizing question: when? Given all we've laid out, when could such a mission even be remotely conceivable? The honest answer is that it's not a matter of years or even decades, it's a matter of centuries. We are not talking about something on the near-term horizon of space agencies. Using a conservative, realistic assessment of technological and social progress, a one-way human mission to Pluto is unlikely to be seriously contemplated before the end of the 21st century, and that's in an optimistic scenario where we aggressively pursue the necessary breakthroughs. A round-trip mission with even a semblance of safety and sustainability is almost certainly a project for the 22nd or 23rd century. This timeline isn't pessimism, it's a reflection of the sequential mountains we must climb. First, we must become a truly multi-planet species closer to home. A sustained, self-sufficient human presence on Mars is not just a precursor, it's a mandatory testing ground. Mars is our graduate school for deep space living. On Mars, we would learn to build habitats from local materials, operate with multi-year communication delays, manage closed-loop life support for long periods, and protect crews from radiation in a non-Earth environment. The technologies developed for a Martian colony, advanced propulsion for faster transit, robust in situ resource utilization, reliable nuclear power, and food production systems are the very same technologies, just in their infancy, needed for a Pluto mission. Mars is the necessary intermediate step because it offers a somewhat forgiving environment compared to the utter void. If we cannot create a society on Mars that can survive without constant resupply from Earth, we stand no chance at Pluto. So the clock for Pluto doesn't start ticking until Mars is a going concern, which itself is probably a 50 to 100 year project from today. After Mars, the next stepping stone might be the asteroid belt or the moons of Jupiter, but those are still far more hospitable than the Kuiper belt. The development of the primary enabling technology, advanced propulsion, will dictate the pace. If we have a breakthrough in nuclear fusion propulsion within the next 50 years, the timeline could accelerate. But that's a gigantic if. Fusion for space propulsion is a different challenge than fusion for power on Earth. It requires compact, lightweight and incredibly reliable reactors. More likely we will see incremental steps. Nuclear thermal propulsion for Mars, then perhaps more efficient nuclear electric systems for cargo to the outer system, and finally something more advanced for crewed missions. Each step takes a generation to develop, test and deploy. The other colossal hurdle is human biology. Solving the radiation and microgravity problems for decades-long journeys might require medical advances we cannot yet envision. Perhaps we will develop effective gene therapies to repair radiation damage, or artificial gravity through spinning habitats will become routine. The hibernation question is key. If we can achieve safe, long-term torpor, the psychological and logistical problems shrink dramatically, making the mission far more plausible earlier. But that technology, if it's possible at all, is also many decades away from human application. The economic and political will is the slowest variable of all. Our global civilization does not currently operate on century-long timescales for single projects. The project would require a stable, unified and prosperous human civilization with a long-term vision, something we have never consistently maintained. It might require a transformative event, a global consensus to become a spacefaring species as a primary goal, or perhaps a geopolitical competition akin to the Cold War, but on a solar system scale. More likely, it will await a time when the economic activity of the inner solar system, asteroid mining, lunar industry, Martian settlements, generates enough wealth and infrastructure that mounting an expedition to the Kuiper belt is a natural and affordable expansion, not a singular, bankrupting national effort. So, let's sketch a plausible, slow-paced timeline. The rest of this century, focus on the Moon and Mars, establish permanent bases, develop and test nuclear propulsion, conduct advanced robotic exploration of the outer planets and Kuiper belt. The 22nd century, with a stable Mars colony as a hub, begin building the infrastructure for deeper travel. Maybe construct large spacecraft in orbit around Mars or in the asteroid belt. Launch the first crewed missions to the asteroid belt and perhaps to Jupiter's moons. These would be missions lasting 5 to 10 years, further testing human endurance. The late 22nd or 23rd century, if all has gone well, the technology, the biological countermeasures, and the economic foundation might finally align to permit the first human mission to Pluto. It would likely be a one-way mission for a small crew of pioneers, intended to establish a permanent, albeit tiny, scientific outpost, using local resources to sustain itself indefinitely. A round-trip mission is an order of magnitude harder and would come later if ever. This timeline feels frustratingly distant, but it's grounded in the reality of the challenges. It means that none of us alive today will see it. Our grandchildren likely won't see it. It is a project for our descendants, a gift of ambition passed down through generations. This very fact changes the nature of the endeavour. It stops being a mission and becomes a legacy. It requires a civilization that thinks in terms of legacies. So, the when is less about a specific year and more about a specific condition. We will go to Pluto when we have matured as a spacefaring civilization, when the journey is no longer a suicidal leap into the unknown, but a long, difficult, yet manageable expedition. When our technology has tamed the hazards of distance and time to the point where the human factors become the primary challenge, not the show-stopping one. It will happen when going to the outer solar system is a logical extension of our sphere of influence, not a fantastical outlier. In the meantime, our robotic avatars will continue to blaze the trail. They will map the territory, identify the resources, and send back the data that makes the human mission possible. The New Horizons flyby was the first scouting report. Future orbiters, landers, and sample return missions from the Kuiper Belt will fill in the map. Our knowledge will grow, and with it, the perceived feasibility. The mission will shift from if to how, only after decades of robotic data has made Pluto and its neighbours familiar places. Therefore, the most honest answer to when might be this. We will send humans to Pluto when we stop being Earthlings, who occasionally visit space and become a true solar system species, for whom travel between planets is as normalised as intercontinental travel is today. It will be a consequence of our growth, not a singular goal. It will happen when the frontier is no longer a distant, terrifying void, but a neighbourhood we're slowly moving into. That day is far off, but it is not impossible. It awaits a future version of humanity that has mastered its home system, conquered the biological limits of space, and retained the curious, driven spirit that made us look up at Pluto in the first place. Until then, we plan, we develop, we explore with our machines, and we lay the groundwork brick by brick, century by century, for the day when someone finally looks out a window and sees the heart of Pluto filling their view, not as the end of a journey, but as another beginning.